Welcome back, everyone, to Morning Line. Nick Barris on a Wednesday. A handsome fella sitting next to me in the dapper-looking jacket is Clint Kelly. He's a malpractice attorney and taking your phone call, 737-7587. Always good to see him. If you have a question or comment about a case, maybe, as he said, sometimes you get that sixth sense. Something didn't go right with the doctor at the hospital. Make the call. You don't want to wait, because if you do have a case and you wait more than a year, it's bupkis.
That's right.
Yeah, let's go to Tommy. Tommy, good morning.
Good morning, Nick. How you doing?
Good, Tommy. What can we do for you?
Well, I have a question for your attorney there.
Sure.
My mother I live in Sparta, Tennessee. My mother was in a nursing home, and she contracted MRSA. And she's a diabetic, but yet I've got her out of the nursing home and took her out. But the doctor that she had was, he was just a private practice doctor, P.2. But I was sending her to a specialist, and they was treating this in medical. But when she goes back into the nursing home, the doctor that was at the nursing home was deleting the medicine, taking the medicine away from her, and they wasn't giving it to her. And the MRSA had got bad. And now, at this time, I think I had contracted MRSA from my mother off of it. I'm not sure. I'm going to the doctor end of this month, and I'll visit, and I'm going to speak with him and have tests and stuff. And I just want to know what if there's anything to be done if it was.
All right, that's an interesting question, because I call that a third-party claim. A doctor has a duty, obviously, to his patient. It's a physician-patient relationship, but there is an additional duty, which is a duty to third parties to warn. In the event that the physician knows or should know that the patient's sickness could infect somebody else. There was a case about 20 years ago in Tennessee where a wife had Rocky Mountain spotted fever. The doctor mistreated it, didn't warn the husband that she had it, and the husband contracted it and he died. So there is a potential legal theory for compensation. I will say this about MRSA. MRSA's nasty, Nick. It's a staph infection that's resistant to a lot of antibiotics. It takes a very special antibiotic to treat it, and it may take a long time to treat. I'm not judging Tommy's mom's situation. I'm just saying it's very tough to treat MRSA these days, particularly in the elderly person whose ability to fight infections is not as good as someone who's younger. I can't tell if Tommy got it from her or someone else, but it's that's a tough infection to fight.
With more serious illnesses, if a doctor finds out about something that can be passed from his patient to one of her loved ones or something like that, and doesn't alert them to that, and they pass it on, of course I'm thinking of HIV,
right?
Something like that.
Very good example.
Would that be something that could be litigated?
Yes, it would, and you would have a potential claim in that situation if the physician knew or should have known that the patient had this disease and failed to warn family members.
Well, now, would he or she have to tell the patient, you need to let them know? Isn't there HIPAA laws where he can't spread the word that my patient has HIV? I'm just wondering, what would the doctor do? Okay, he'd say, well, sir, you have HIV. And in this case, you need to let your loved ones know. Would that cover him or her from any kind of litigation by telling that?
I don't think that would be sufficient. I think the doctor would have some duty. I'm talking about family members now.
Okay, okay, then the HIPAA doesn't apply then if you're talking to family members?
There is some HIPAA protection, but the physician has an obligation to warn immediate members of the family of a deadly disease.
Okay.
You're not really giving up anything confidential in that situation, because more likely than not the patient has already signed a HIPAA release allowing family members to know what their medical condition is.
Yeah, and in some conditions, some illnesses actually, the doctors have to report it to the health department too, don't they?
That's correct. That is
that
correct.
as well. As far as his call was concerned, it doesn't look like there would be an action here when it comes to MRSA or something like that. I didn't know if he was asking about a case.
I think that's going to be a tough case.
Is MRSA one? What's the infection that shows up a lot in hospitals? Is it MRSA?
MRSA.
Is that
staph, and this is a form of staph that's particularly resistant to antibiotics.
Okay, yeah. You go to a hospital to get healthy and you get an infection.
It's full of bugs, Nick. That's what's good. Same with nursing homes. They're full of bugs.
Yeah, you say it's the sickest place. Yeah. Don't go. 737-7587 if you want to join. Next on the line is Brian. Brian, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Three things. First thing, what exactly was the result of the legislature this session? I know we talked about it before. I don't think anything came of it. Number two, the big in the news lately has been health care in prison and correctional and jail facilities, both in Nashville, the Metro Jail Sheriff was on, and then in Trousdale. My brother was an eye doctor. He is an eye doctor. And when he first started out, he used to do some work in prisons and stuff just because to help his practice going. You know, a lot of younger doctors will do that because, you know, they need the money.
Sure.
And what are those people culpable? The doctors, I mean, those, do they, I know their health care is pretty poor, but could inmates and
can they sue? Yeah, okay, we'll answer that. And did you have a third one also?
Could they sue?
Do you have one other question?
Yeah, and my last question, I can't remember what it was.
Okay. Well, we did touch bases on what you just asked, and you're right. That's in the news, and Clint basically said it's a difficult case to make sometimes,
yeah,
right?
Let me take these two in order.
Okay.
First of all, there was no legislation passed in the legislature that affects the health care liability laws or medical malpractice
One way or
laws.
the other.
One way or the other. Nothing came out.
Okay.
So the law stays the same. As for the ability of an inmate to sue a physician, like he said his brother provided eye care, there are other doctors obviously that are hired by jails to provide care, and yes, they owe a duty to inmates, and if they provide substandard care, they themselves can be sued individually. The problem is if they're deemed to be an employee of the government, you've got the caps. If they're not an employee of the government, then you can get around the caps. It just depends on the circumstances.
Still, 300 grand is nothing to sneeze at if you win that.
It is nothing to sneeze at, particularly if someone dies. And like I was telling you off air, the question is, what if there are a number of inmates that are getting substandard care?
Yeah.
You know, where it's
Right.
something along the lines of a class action, that's a game changer.
That's where they get it together, class action. All right, let's go next to Sue. Sue, good morning.
Good morning. I have a question about gadolinium dye. I'm wondering if Clint is familiar with that.
Are you okay?
Gadolinium.
Okay. You'll have to explain it to me, but let her, yeah.
Used in MRIs. For
Okay.
imaging.
Oh, it's a dye. Okay,
Correct.
I'm sorry, Sue. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I've had MRIs in the past, and I'm scheduled to have another one, and it's never been an issue until I saw a report a couple weeks ago on Full Measure, the Cheryl Atkinson program, and of course they always deal with kind of the extreme cases, and this involved the actor Chuck Norris's wife, who had to have 5 MRIs. I mean, right away I would question, over what period of time and why 5 of them. But in any event, they claimed to have spent over $1 million in costs to toxicology doctors and so forth after she almost died after this, because as I understand it, it's got some sort of metallic aspect to it that is normally excreted, but in her case it built up into her bloodstream. And anyway, I started doing some research on it after that, and I found out that the FDA is aware of this. They've been aware of it for about 2 years, and they wouldn't. The thing that bothered me is they wouldn't comment for the program. Maybe they thought it would go kind of in the extreme direction it may have gone, but I'm trying to be proactive because the way I'm thinking about it is I don't know, having had these MRIs over the years, what kind of what buildup I've had in my system, and if something like this should happen to me, if I were to go to Clint at that point, and this were to go to court, the other side would say, well, you knew of the risks going into it, so insurance doesn't even cover it. So.
Interesting. That's a great question. You're familiar with this. Have there been problems that she said? Boy, that's interesting.
I'm not aware of those problems. What I've seen in the past are people who have allergies.
Yeah.
One of the things they're supposed to determine is, are you allergic to the contrast agent? Because if you are, and they administer the contrast agent during an imaging scan, you can get sick or potentially die. That I'm aware of, but I'm not aware of these other problems. I hadn't heard about Chuck Norris's wife. I'm going to look that up after the show and find out what happened and see if I can get more information on that. As far as Sue's concerned about, hey, you knew what you were getting yourself into and did it anyway, sometimes the patient doesn't have a choice. They may need the test. And medically, radiologists can do things, provide substitutes for this to try to get around the prospective problems that a patient might have using this type of contrast agent. But just because the patient, quote unquote, knows what may happen doesn't get the doctor off the hook, because they still have an obligation to provide testing and comply with the standard of care, and if they don't, they can be liable.
You know what that makes me think about is you watch a lot of these commercials on TV for different types of pharmaceuticals, and it does crack me up because half the time I don't know what the drug they're advertising really does, okay? But they talk about that, and then they've got the guy doing the voice reading through a whole long list of, like, you know, if this causes you to have a heart attack and keel over, and if this guy, and I'm like, all the side effects, but they have to cover every single one of them. And my son and I will be sitting there looking at it and goes, gosh, taking this pill sounds way worse than what it treats, you know? Does that get them off the hook when they read on the air all of the potential side effects, some of them which are pretty darn nasty if you take this pill?
No, they're required by the FDA to mention these side effects on TV. It's a requirement.
Yeah.
But it does not alleviate their responsibility to prevent side effects or to manufacture a drug that is safe. And the interesting thing, Nick, is I think it's counterproductive when they mention these side effects, because you and I both know when we hear it, we tune it out.
Oh, yeah.
It's gotten to be so elementary now with these drugs being produced, and they start reading these things. Just tune it out, because it's always seems the same thing: headache, fatigue, diarrhea, you name it. We all just kind of take it as a given. Every drug has side effects.
You've done some cases where you've dealt with clinics for impotency and things like this, and you see some of these ads for some of these things are, if you've had a 24-hour erection, I'm like, you hear that stuff. I don't necessarily tune it out, but it's like, I'm not using any of that medicine after hearing all of the potential side effects. That's the other side of it for me. My son and I said, there's no way. I mean, I'm going to suffer with whatever I've got and take that if these are all the potential side effects.
But there are people who see the commercial and they'll just tune out the side effects and just focus on the benefits of what the drug is, because they say, well, I hear this on every drug.
All the time. And they read it really fast.
Right.
But you can pick up. All right, I was just wondering, because Sue's question went to that about whether you know what the risks are, you take it. Well, you knew the risks, not our fault.
That's a good analogy. It's like the small print buried into a contract. Nobody reads it.
Right.
You're not going to take the time. Just tune it out and you just read what you got to read, and that's the end of it.
And so can that be used against you in court? Well, you didn't read it, or we gave you the warning, you knew about it, you still took it. How's that our fault?
Well, it's an interesting dilemma, but the manufacturer of the medication still has a duty to produce a safe product with adequate warnings. The warnings are supposed to come from the physician.
Yeah, right. I'm assuming most of those cases, when they talk about the side effects, they're relatively rare, but they still throw them out there. And I know that they're doing that for a reason. They'd prefer not to, because that's got to scare some people off, but it's got to be some legal protection for them to do that, I would think. Or why would they? So, all right, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got more calls on the horn waiting for you. The number 737-7587. Clint Kelly is an attorney, specializes in malpractice. You don't do divorces. No, you don't. So don't call with a divorce question. We'll be back with more right after this.